When the Georgia legislature gavelled in this year, one of the first bills filed, Senate Bill number 1, was legislation banning transgender girls from girls' sports teams. The House quickly followed suit.
Because today, the Georgia House puts forward legislation to keep boys out of girls' sports.
Georgia Republicans also introduced bills to restrict puberty blockers for minors and prevent the state health plan from covering gender-affirming care.
But it was the debate over another bill prohibiting the state from covering these treatments for state prison inmates that took a surprising turn.
I feel like we've done more bills this session picking on transgender folks than we've done anything else. But we also need to consider the public's priorities.
Over the last few years, state lawmakers in Georgia and across the country have annually filed hundreds of bills to place restrictions on transgender people.
And even as Republican-led states have already passed laws on bathrooms, sports, medical treatments, and IDs, the bills keep coming.
On today's show, we take a look at what happened in Georgia, an example that shows why the legislation continues and how Democrats are grappling with their response.
Plus, Georgia Republican civil litigation overhaul has now been signed into law.
I expect insurance companies to start dropping rates 3 to 5%. And if they don't, they better have a pretty good reason why not.
And we'll look ahead to the 2026 midterms as the field for Senate and governor start to take shape. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In from WABE.
I'm really eager to hear about your reporting on these bills that are focused on the transgender community. Let's start there, Sam.
I want to begin with this debate over the legislation to prohibit state funds from being used to provide gender-affirming treatments to state prison inmates. Republican sponsors say a handful of state inmates have requested any kind of gender-affirming care. And, I've followed a lot of debates in the legislature focused on transgender Georgians over the last several years, but this one really stood out to me because of the different ways that Democrats approached it. So let's start in the Senate, where 4 Democrats voted yes with Republicans, and a handful took a walk, so, not voting.
Colleagues, I've struggled over this legislation. I have always been committed to ensuring the dignity, humanity, and equality of all Georgians.
That's Senator Elena Parent, usually a vocal opponent of these kinds of bills. She was one of the Democrats who surprised colleagues when she joined Republicans in voting yes.
Sam, I remember some of the surprise when that happened. What's going on there?
Republican Senator John Albers framed Democrats' choice this way.
If you support sex-change drugs and surgeries with taxpayer dollars for convicted criminals, I really believe you've lost touch with your constituents and your grip on reality.
And that is the kind of language that Republican strategist Brian Robinson told me is already being printed on campaign mailers ahead of the next election.
Democrats refuse, that's the word you use, refused. Democrats refuse to stand up for taxpayers when given the choice to ban transition surgeries for prisoners because they don't share your values, because they are out of touch. That is the message.
The Trump campaign deployed similar ads in 2024, and the topic has really become a staple of GOP election messaging. In some states, legislatures controlled by Democrats have strengthened rights for transgender people, but really the trend is still for more bills every year to restrict them.
Republicans are out there responding and putting in rules that Americans and Georgians support.
So, Sam, is there any data to back that up?
Well, the ACLU says nearly 600 anti-LGBTQ bills have been filed in state legislatures this year, most focused on the transgender community, and that is a record since the ACLU started tracking. Now, to Brian's point, according to the Pew Research Center, Americans have become more supportive of restrictions on transgender rights in recent years. But Chase Strangio, who runs the ACLU's LGBTQ and HIV project, says that's because Republican politicians have flooded voters with messaging that says transgender people are a threat.
I think it's incredibly misguided to look at an election aftermath and decide to turn against trans people. And I think in some ways that's what we're seeing. The whole purpose of constitutional rights is to protect against erosion of the rights of politically unpopular minorities.
Strangio is the first openly trans lawyer to argue in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and says advocates have to keep fighting these bills at the state level, even as the laws are ultimately challenged in the courts.
So you mentioned the state level, Sam. Bring us back to the debate here in Georgia.
I spoke to Senator Elena Parent after the session, and she told me reflecting on the last election, Democrats need to do a better job showing they are not out of touch, as Republicans say, with issues that broad swaths of people care about, like the cost of housing or the availability of good-paying jobs.
I mean, that's the reality. In order to govern, you have to win. We need to stand on our values. And we are very clear that transgender Georgians should be able to live their lives with dignity and respect and free of undue discrimination. But we have to recognize that this is an evolving conversation in the public, and seeming as though we are very wrapped up in worry about transgender prisoners, for example, does a disservice if it ends up where you can't talk to voters in areas that we must win if we ever want to have a majority. And by the way, that is a strategy to stop all the bullying bills against the LGBT community, is winning in more places.
And I should say, Parent has gotten some blowback for this vote from some constituents. But it's also true that no matter how much fight Democrats put up, it is difficult to block Republican priorities while still being in the minority. Now, I want to talk about a different approach that Democrats in the House took to this very same bill.
Take a walk! Take a walk! Take a walk! Take a walk! Take a walk!
On the prisoners bill, almost the entire Democratic caucus walked out in protest. Republicans, like Majority Leader Chuck F. Stration, basically called it cowardice.
To see members flee the chamber because they are unwilling to actually represent their constituency and let it be known to all Georgians where they stand is incredibly disappointing.
Outside the chamber, as the bill passed, House Minority Leader Carolyn Hughley said Georgia Democrats are focused on more pressing issues like health and education.
People sent us here to do great work. They did not send us here to bully people, to discriminate against people. Many of us are descendants of those who have felt the same thing.
Now, not all of the trans-focused bills passed this session, but Republicans have pledged to bring up more votes next year as the 2026 midterms get underway.
Sam, thank you so much for your reporting on this. Before we take a break, I want to pause for, let's call it some real talk. WABE's funding is under threat. The station, we're potentially looking at a 10% budget hole if federal funding for public media is cut.
And so we're asking our listeners to step up during our spring fundraising campaign and help power this public service for the future. Take a listen to this from WABE CEO Jennifer Dorian.
Hey, Atlanta. This is Jennifer Dorian, CEO of WABE, your beloved local station. I'm here to say we need your help. This is a time when people need free access to fact-based news and information. WABE is more valuable than ever before. And yet, this is a time when we are also more vulnerable. We rely on very uncertain federal funds for 10% of our budget. Fortunately for us, Atlanta has our back. 90% of our funding comes from the support of this local community. So Atlanta, it's a great time to show you value WABE. Please make a gift or increase your giving today. Help sustain the station you love. Let's keep WABE secure, on mission. We want to fight for the facts, fight for the free press, and contribute to our community's well-being. Go to wabe.org/donate, and thanks for protecting public media.
You're listening to Plugged In from WABE.
Welcome back to Plugged In from WABE.
It is bill signing season. Hundreds of bills are on the governor's desk. He has until mid-May to sign, veto, or let them pass without his signature. But this week, Governor Brian Kemp signed what he called his top legislative priority, an overhaul of civil litigation rules commonly known as tort reform.
That's right, Sam. But you know what? Even before the bill was signed, top Republicans began hitting the road to sell the legislation to the public. Sam, I want to take you to the Lew Walker Senior Center in DeKalb County to an event sponsored by Greater Georgia. Now, this is an organization that registers and mobilizes voters. It was founded by former U.S. Senator Kelly Loeffler. She now serves in the Trump administration, leading the Small Business Administration. Walking into the Senior Center's Victory Multipurpose Room, attendees were mingling, heading to the food table that had fruit, cookies, lemonade, sweet tea. I didn't have any of it. Insurance Commissioner John King was the guest of honor, and he fired up the event in front of what I would call generally a friendly crowd.
I really appreciate the opportunity. This is my first opportunity really to come and talk to folks and really listen to your questions, because that's really what I'm interested in. Is first of all, nobody knows what tort means. If you speak Spanish, tort is close to torta, which means sandwich. And that's about it. So I ask people not to call it tort because nobody knows what tort means. Is abuse of our judicial civil justice system.
You know, Sam, here's what he told the crowd that he expects from insurance companies after all the political capital that was used in the legislative fight.
And so don't come in with some nonsense of 14, 20% rate increase, because I'm not going to give it to you. We're going to have public hearings, and you're going to have to justify to the public why you deserve that kind of rate increase. I don't think Georgia's, customers ought to be paying for risk in Florida or risk in Alabama and other states. That's just flat wrong. And so I don't mind holding their feet to the fire. But they're going to have to show us the numbers in public before I even, clearly I need to keep them in the state so you have options to buy insurance. But I expect 3 to 5% rate decreases after this. And this is what happened in Florida after they passed tort reform.
Now, Sam, Commissioner King there talking about auto insurance rates during the next round of rate filings. Separately, he believes Georgia could attract new insurers for truckers, businesses, and homeowners, which he believes could lower those rates.
Yes. Madam Representative.
Now, Sam, as I mentioned, the crowd was friendly, but there was a notable moment as Democratic State Representative Angela Moore, who represents a neighboring district and voted against the main civil litigation bill, she questioned King about her beliefs that insurance rates wouldn't come down, that homeowners could lose their homes, and that people would not be fully compensated for their injuries. I asked her about that last item after the event.
He did not answer my question. Clearly, if you were in the room, you knew. Normally, what happens is people get in accidents or whatever the case may be, and let's just say we lose a limb, and we file for the maximum on an insurance policy of $1 million. Well, clearly, $385,000 is going to go for your surgery and your medicines, the doctor care, that's not included in your surgical care, and then rehab and any type of limb replacement that you may have, a prosthetic. Then you got 40% to a lawyer. How much do you think you're going to net as a person, as a human being with no arm or no digits or no legs, and still be able to make it out in this world?
Look, Sam, a number of times we've heard Governor Kemp say that those who are injured will be made whole. We heard other supporters say that this will not restrict access to the civil justice system. Separately, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Republicans have heard the question, will this lower, or the word we've been hearing, stabilize insurance rates? In the House, Speaker John Burns has launched a committee to study how insurance rates are set, profit margins, claims processing, and more. And of course, we'll be watching what happens in the courts and with insurance rates.
All right, let's turn to the actual bill signing now. This week, after months of negotiations, threats, incentives, and salesmanship, Governor Brian Kemp signed the controversial legislation into law. And Kemp is kind of taking a victory lap after signing, what is basically a once-in-a-generation overhaul of Georgia's civil litigation rules. This was somewhat of a shining moment for a term-limited governor, as he's also weighing his political future.
We tuned out the noise. We stood strong against the lies and false attacks, and we did what was right.
Opponents, as you mentioned, Rahul, argue the changes would restrict access to the civil justice system. Kemp's allies see a legacy-defining accomplishment that will further bolster Georgia's business climate. Here again is Insurance Commissioner John King, and it will become clear in a moment why I wanted to grab him after the signing.
Without the governor leading this effort, this would not have gotten done. There's no way.
This signing comes as top Republicans are urging Kemp to challenge Democratic Senator John Ossoff next year. But trading the governor's mansion to be one of 100 senators is not everyone's idea of a promotion, you could say. Between Trump's presidency and the erratic stock market or a possible economic downturn, Democrats could maybe have more favorable conditions to win in 2026. But until Kemp decides, the GOP field has been mostly frozen.
I think rightly so. It should be. But if he decides not to pursue that, then I'm going to look hard at it.
Okay, Sam, while we're here, let's stay with 2026 and talk about the governor's race.
This week, we had a notable entry on the Democratic side, State Senator Jason Estevez.
I'm Jason Estevez. I've had enough of families working harder than ever, but still struggling, and our kids falling behind instead of getting ahead. Yet extreme politicians in Georgia push Trump's reckless agenda, rig the system for special interests, and stick us with the bill. The reason I love basketball so much, if you hustle, stand strong, and work together, you can overcome the odds and win.
Yes, Sam, he's the first high-profile Democrat to do so. Before becoming a state senator in 2023, Estevez served on the Atlanta School Board from 2014 to 2022, including some time as chair. He tells me he plans on running on issues like investing in public education, improving access to health care, making it easier to start a business, and working against what's happening in Washington.
Well, look, I think that what President Trump and Elon Musk are doing is wrong, and they are negatively impacting Georgians across this state, not only in their pocketbooks, but with jobs. They're impacting their future.
I also talked to him about the path to winning a statewide general election. And in the context of running statewide, he mentioned his roots in Columbus, along with owning restaurants in Columbus and in Macon.
Yeah, I really noticed the focus on Columbus and Macon. It's always a challenge for Atlanta Democrats to build appeal outside the metro. And I also thought the focus on Trump really stood out from that introductory campaign ad and also from your interview. Estevez is also Black and Latino and could help, rebuild some energy in those communities that may have felt a little sidelined in 2024. So who else is in and out for Democrats? And remind us who we're watching on the GOP side.
So, Sam, let's continue with the Democrats. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has said she plans on running. Two folks that we've been watching for a possible run are two-time nominee Stacey Abrams and former DeKalb County CEO Michael Thurman. A reminder about him, he was elected to statewide office as labor commissioner 3 times, including 2002 and 2006, when Republicans were elected governor on the same ticket. So that's notable to me. 2 other notable names to mention are the grandson of former President Jimmy Carter and former state Senator Jason Carter. He is out because his wife Kate is fighting brain cancer, while Congresswoman Lucy McBath has suspended her exploratory committee to deal with her husband Curtis's complications from cancer surgery. Sam, I do have some choice words for cancer, but of course now we are heard on the radio. Over on the Republican side, Attorney General Chris Carr has already announced his run for governor, and we do expect Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones to jump into the race as well. As a prospective candidate for lieutenant governor told me, it is the worst kept secret in Georgia politics.
And, those dynamics were on display this week at the civil litigation bill signing with those 2 men standing near the governor, but on opposite ends of the Capitol steps.
Oh, we're going to see so much more of that, Sam. Before we go, I do want to revisit a story from last week with ongoing implications. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is facing scrutiny for stock purchases she made just before President Donald Trump announced a pause on his most sweeping round of tariffs. Tell us more about that, Sam.
Yeah, amid the escalating trade war, the stock market had tanked. But then on the morning of April 9th, Trump posted online, "This is a great time to buy." Later that day, his pause on that sweeping round of tariffs sent markets shooting up. Greene's public disclosure, which is required by law, shows that on April 8th and 9th, she bought between tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock in companies like Amazon, Lululemon, Tesla, Nike, and Apple. Some Democrats accuse Greene and others of, at the very least, profiting off the market volatility or possibly participating in insider trading. Greene spoke to reporters after her Cobb County town hall last week, where you may remember a couple of protesters got tased by police. Greene called the criticism over her stock trades laughable.
President Trump has been talking about tariffs for decades. I don't place my buys and sells. That's something that the portfolio manager does for me, and he did a great job. Guess what he did? He bought the dip.
So I called up Kedrick Payne with the Campaign Legal Center. He used to work at the congressional office charged with investigating potential violations by members of Congress.
Determining what is confidential is part of what makes an investigation into these issues so difficult. You must know precisely what information the member had and whether or not that was known anywhere else.
Payne says the Office of Congressional Conduct has effectively shut down, making investigation unlikely. He supports a ban on stock trading by members of Congress, which has gained some traction on both sides of the aisle in recent years. He says even the appearance of conflict can erode public trust.
So that's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE.
Before we go, an important announcement. WABE's biannual Pints and Politics Trivia Night is coming up, hosted by me and Rahul. Join us on Thursday, May 8th at 6:30 p.m.
We'll be gathering at Monday Night Brewing in West Midtown. You'll be able to compete for prizes, so bring your team or just show up and we'll put you in a team. Get your tickets at wabe.org/events.
Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
Plugged In is available wherever you want to listen. Hey, if you listen on demand, make sure you head over to the Plugged In feed to subscribe and leave us a rating.
You can now also find us on the radio at 90.1 every Friday morning from 9:30 to 10 a.m. If you have a question you want to hear answered on the show, you can write to us at tellus@wabe.org.
We'll be back next week.